Hello everyone, welcome to FY028 Inquiry-Based Learning. This is week 2, and in this week we're going to have a look at the topic of planning and conducting your research inquiry. So let's start by outlining the main stages of a research inquiry, and then in the following slides we'll have a look at them individually and discuss each one in more detail. So the first stage of any research inquiry is to select a topic. And in our case, it would be to select one of the 10 topics that we've provided relating to an aspect of computing, whether that's cloud computing, software engineering, networking, or looking at operating systems. And then once you've thought about and selected one of those 10 topics, the next step is where we get very specific within that subject area. We might refer to this as the research focus, or perhaps the research question, of which guides our investigation of that topic. So we don't concern ourselves with the entire field of software engineering, but rather we might select one of the particular models of software engineering and explore that in the most detail. Or perhaps we might focus on another aspect of software engineering, such as the development of a particular model over a period of time, or we may even contrast two of the most prominent software engineering models in the most detail. So to say again, we're not concerning ourselves with the entire subject area, we're focusing on one or maybe a few aspects of it to which we investigate and research in detail. And then once we've got our research focus, the next stage of the research inquiry process is then to plan and prepare for the research, thinking through all the ins and outs of how it's going to be done, the timeline, how much time you're going to allow for certain areas of the research. And then following on from that, the fourth stage is, of course, to actually go and do that, to actually implement the plan and follow it to the best of your ability. Hopefully you've planned it through and will then execute that plan in a methodical manner so that hopefully you don't encounter too many surprises, or at least if you do encounter problems, you can know how to deal with them so to get back on track and meet the deadline. And then once you've conducted your research in a timely manner, make sure you allow enough time to write up your findings in a research report. And this typically constitutes the last step of the research inquiry, reporting what you've found out. So that's an overview of some of the main stages of the research inquiry process. Now we're going to talk about some of those stages in more detail and offer some practical advice and tips for how you might go about doing them. Starting with the first stage, the selection of the research topic, you might be in a place where you know exactly what you want to research and what avenue you want to pursue, which is great. But if you're in a place where you're not sure which topic you want to pursue, talking to your fellow students might be a good place to start. And through those conversations, some topics of interest may emerge naturally in the conversation, or you might start getting excited by what they're looking into. And that might inspire you to read more about the subject area and perhaps find an avenue that you want to look into. So that's a really good practical way of getting started, of actually just talking it through with other people. Other students on your course, maybe your tutors, or other friends or people you know in the field. And that might develop some interest in you to get you started. Other helpful ideas include making use of the library on campus, as well as plenty of online resources that we've linked you to in our Blackboard page. Have a look through those. There's also some suggested book titles as well in there that may help inspire you with some titles for your projects, or at least provide more information on how to go about conducting the research inquiry. And of course, this is a great opportunity to research more about your own interests. When enrolling on this foundation course, you probably chose a particular specialism of computing, whether that's software engineering or AI or cybersecurity. So if that's something that interests you, it makes sense to explore that further, as those are the modules you'll then be going on to take in later years. It makes sense to get a head start with looking into particular aspects and trends within those particular sectors. And perhaps if you've already started thinking about your final year dissertation, this could be a great way of preparing the ground and starting to research into that topic area, to which you may then go on to extend further in your final year project and dissertation. And just on that note, I'd strongly encourage you to choose a subject area that is going to inspire you and motivate you to want to do the research, as this is going to make the research process a lot more enjoyable. And therefore, it is worth spending that extra time at the start of the process to seriously think through and consider what is the right topic for you, because that's going to be much better for you in the long term, rather than just diving into the first topic that comes to mind and later on you find halfway through that it doesn't interest you anymore and you don't really want to do the research. Okay, so it's worth spending that extra time at the start, thinking through and finding the right topic for you. Let's move on then and have a look at the next step, which follows on from the first step, of course. Once you've identified your broad subject area, which one of the 10 areas that you want to explore, the next step is typically to get more specific and have a look at one of the aspects of that area which you want to base your report around. And perhaps this may come hand in hand with the particular subject area that you're interested in. Perhaps you've already got an idea of what you want to focus on, but regardless of whether you have or haven't, this is still a good stage to be refining that. So even if you have got a good idea, you can still be refining that focus or that research question based around some of the following criteria. For example, of course, it's really important that you identify the issue that you want to investigate, but you may also want to set out a particular objective, such as something you want to prove or disprove, or perhaps yours is an exploratory piece or an experimental piece where you don't have a set objective but aim to find out more about it. And then the final one, of course, is to refer to the boundaries or the limits of your research. So this is where you have a scope of what you can realistically explore in the given time frame or within the subject area. As we said before, it's important that we establish this research focus near the start of the project. It's worth spending a bit of extra time thinking this through and seriously considering whether this is something you want to commit to for the duration of the project, but it is really important that a research question or a problem or a specific focus is identified, preferably near the start of the report, so that you can then evaluate the literature that you read and the work that you write for how well it actually answers or responds to this question or this title that you've identified. Because it's very easy to read something interesting and put it into your report, but then if it doesn't have any relevance to the title or the specific aspect that you're investigating, then it's not going to be very useful. So it's important that we stay on track and evaluate everything that we read and we write based on how well it answers or responds to the research question or the problem. That being said, there are also cases where researchers have to change their research question based upon limitations. Perhaps they can't access the sources they need to or get access to the data that they need to either prove or disprove their research question, or perhaps they encounter new information which will interfere with the research question or perhaps already answers the research question, especially in the case where researchers are conducting novel research. But in those cases, and especially at your level, it's always best to consult with your tutors before you go about making major changes, because perhaps your tutors may be able to offer some easy solutions which prevent you from having to make those drastic changes to your research project. as your tutors will probably know some places where you can look, or certainly know other colleagues who will know places where you can look to find the data that you're looking for or the sources that you need. And it's certainly not a requirement to conduct original research at this level, but should you want to, and you find that that research has already been conducted, your tutors can also offer some advice regarding that as well. So, as we said, it's really important to contact your tutors before you make drastic changes. Send them an email and discuss it and talk it through with them. Once you have identified the research question or the research focus, the next step is to write it down in the form of a research proposal. And this is typically where you would describe the thinking behind the research problem. And this is where you might outline the background leading up to this decision, this focus, as well as it might summarize the discussions that you've had with a supervisor, your tutors. And if you've done any initial reading around this topic area, it's also useful to include those sources. We refer to these as references. There's going to be a full presentation on referencing and how to do that in the Harvard format. But perhaps for now, just note down those book titles and the authors so that we know the type of sources which are informing and going to be related to your research. And then, as well as recording the work that you've done so far, referring to the thinking through the topic and choosing the research focus and the sources, the research proposal also suggests the plan going forward for how much time you might allocate to the remaining tasks, such as finding the other sources, locating them on a database or in the library or online, as well as, of course, reading through those sources and processing them, writing notes and thinking about how they connect together. And then, of course, writing that up in the final stage. So a good research proposal would also include a plan for how much time is going to be allocated to the remaining stages. And this is also going to be something that will help you to keep on track, as this is something you can keep going back to and, if necessary, updating the plan if say something takes longer than expected, or perhaps you finish a task in a quicker time frame than you expected. You can readjust the time frame for the remaining tasks. Therefore, we recommend using the following headings to help frame your research proposal. The first one would be the topic, which is, of course, the area that your research report will study. And then the specific focus, the research question or the research problem, what you're trying to find out. And then the third section would refer to the significance of this, so more that you want to find out about. And then finally, we'd want to see you refer to the primary resources, i.e. the main sources that will inform your inquiry. Okay, so when you come to write your research proposal, make sure you refer to these 4 sections. We've already mentioned the research plan, but here we want to emphasize its importance again, and particularly want to highlight the importance of realistic planning, because if this is the first time that you're undertaking these stages, perhaps such as writing a literature review or even just finding sources on a database, this could take more time than anticipated because you've got to learn how to do it. So it's always wise to factor in some extra time if it's the first time that you're undertaking a new task. It's also very important that you keep a track of when the deadline is for the final report. Something I like to do is to put the deadlines into my phone calendar, so when I'm looking at the month ahead or the weeks ahead, I know exactly how much time I'm going to have before the deadline comes up. And I often like to work backwards as well. If I know the deadline is at the end of the month, I can work back through the weeks to know what the milestones are that I need to complete things by. And then if, say, I was to be late on delivering one of those milestones, I know I've got to make up that extra time by maybe finding a block of time, a few hours in an evening, say, to catch up so that I can meet the overall deadline at the end of the month. So So by all means, if you use your phone a lot, maybe put the deadline into your phone calendar so that you know when it's coming up, and maybe set up some reminders as well to let you know how many weeks it is until that deadline. But I've also used Word documents, tables in Word documents, and Excel spreadsheets as well to keep a track of days and weeks, and then write in the different tasks that need to be completed in those days or those weeks. And maybe for the purposes of this assignment, this coursework piece, you might like to write it down in the Word document so you can share that with us when we come to have a look at your proposal. So we can comment on things and let you know if we think they're realistic or not, because of course us as tutors, we've been through the process, so we have a reasonable idea of how long things are going to take, and so we can advise you with that. And we fully respect that this may change and problems may come up. Life's full of unforeseen events, so we respect that it's probably going to change, and we have to adjust to those events and things that crop up unexpected. But the main point is that we recognize them and then we can adjust to them. Okay, so a research plan is not something that you write once at the start of the process and then just file away and forget about it. It's something that you keep updating and you keep coming back to. Okay, so just have that in mind when you start the research process. It's going to be something that is dynamic and something that you're going to have to update. But this is also a great experience to learn about planning skills and management skills, because these skills will also factor into your future assignments and future projects as well. This is an essential life skill that you have the chance to get to learn more about and discover more about yourself as you do this project. So it's highly recommended that you engage with this planning process. You probably don't need me to tell you about procrastination. I'm sure all of us have probably experienced it at one time or another, or perhaps still struggle with it. And of course, it's usually the symptom of something else. So the following reasons that we've outlined here are common causes of procrastination, such as poor time management or lack of motivation, or even personal issues that are affecting your concentration. On the motivation front, remember what I said a few minutes ago with regards to choosing a topic that's going to inspire you and interest you. Hopefully, if you've taken the time to find that, hopefully this can help motivate you to keep coming back and wanting to read more and find out more about the subject area. But of course, life's full of unpredictable events which can throw even the best of us off course. So if you do experience something that affects your study, please do reach out and let us know. Preferably sooner rather than later. Don't suffer in silence and leave it to the last week, because it's going to be much easier for us to intervene at an earlier stage than it is at a later stage. So please do let us know, and we'll try our best to help you and get you back on track. And as I said previously, it's important that you update your plan on a regular basis. So if you struggle with procrastination one week, or perhaps poor health, or perhaps just have a busier week than anticipated, and therefore you don't manage to complete what you set out to, make sure that you update your plan so you know what needs to be done over the remaining weeks, and where you might find the time to catch up so that you can stay on track. It might also be a good idea to plan around your other assignments and other commitments. So you might find it beneficial to plan for the entire semester with putting in all the respective deadlines and coursework markers. So that would then enable you to deliver all of the pieces of work by the intended deadlines. Therefore, as we said earlier, investing time in tracking your progress will almost certainly benefit not only this module, but all of your other modules you're doing concurrently, and all of your future modules and projects that you take on. So it's a very important life skill that you've got the opportunity to practice and develop during this module. And remember that you can also share your plan with your tutors. As we said earlier, they've been through the process, so they've got a good idea for how long things take, so they can advise you whether they think your plan's realistic or not. Or alternatively, there's plenty of other academic staff in the department, or even the LDU, the Learning Development Unit, which specialises in helping students learn the essential skills for studying, for reading and writing, and for researching. They can definitely advise you with regards to that and support you along that journey. And you may also want to ask for feedback from your fellow students, your peers as well. You can compare your plans and see how long you've allocated for each item, and you may also remind one another if you've missed something. So there's lots of great people in amongst the student and staff community that can support you in this planning process and also for your research journey. Following on from that, as we just said, there are plenty of staff in the community to help you during your project. We also want to take this opportunity to set up the ground rules and the expectations for how the staff and student relationship is going to work. And the main thing to note here is that it's a two-way street. The tutors have responsibility, and you, as the students, also have responsibility. Us as tutors have the responsibility to help you when you ask for it. We want to be accessible and available to you when you email us. And just to say again, we are only an email away. So if you need our help, please do email us. And we also have a responsibility to make this information as accessible as possible. That's why we're recording these presentations, so that you can view them anytime and anywhere. But you as students have a responsibility to manage and take ownership of your project. Okay, this is your project. It's not our project. Our as tutors, it's not our project, it's your project. Okay, so we expect you to drive and manage and to take ownership of your project. Don't just sit around and wait for us to tell you what to do, because we're not going to do that. We expect you to be proactive and to be seeking help when you need it. To say again, we're not going to be chasing you. We may well check up on you from time to time, and we'll host live sessions where you can attend, and we'll have a question and answer session. But don't use this as the first port of call. We want you to be proactive in reaching out to us when you need our input. Okay, think of us as advisors, perhaps mentors if you prefer, that we can offer advice when you ask for it. So we just want to make these expectations really clear, okay? You're the ones that are going to be driving the project. We're the ones that can offer advice. So here are some tips for getting the most out of your meetings with us. If and when you choose to arrange some meetings with us, you might want to schedule them into your plan. So referring back to your research plan, you might want to schedule in some meetings around the particular milestones of delivering this coursework. So that might be around the project proposal, perhaps when you've done the literature review, and just before you are about to submit your research report. Hopefully we've got a good indication as we've been going along, as we've been checking your progress, but you may also want us to check for any last minute things that you might be anxious about or not sure about. We can be on hand to look at those as well. Right, so scheduling those in advance would be helpful for us because we can put them in the diary. That's definitely what we'd advise, and we'd advise you as well to schedule them into your diary, into your plan. And so this leads us into the next point, which is not only being prepared and preparing in advance, but coming to meetings being prepared. Being prepared to know what you want to get out of those meetings. Okay, it's a good thing to send us work in advance. That's a good step. Okay, please do send that well in advance so that we can have a read through. And what I want to say here is that it's also useful to point out what you want us to look at in your report. As I say, it's good asking us to take a look at your work, but what do you want us to look at in your work? Do you want us to look at the sections? Do you want us to look at the references? Do you want us to look for any spelling mistakes or any grammar errors? What is it? What type of feedback do you actually want from us? Just like everything else in life, you stand a much better chance of getting what you want, getting the type of feedback that you want, using us as tutors the most effectively if you know what you want. If you don't know what you want, then the chances of finding what you want are probably going to be much slimmer. So come prepared. Come knowing what you're looking for. Bring some questions. Bring some points to discuss that are going to help you to develop your research, okay? I'd say, it's good that you send it in advance, but give us something specific to look at. Otherwise, the best we could probably have to do is offer some general feedback, which may or may not help you. We might say it's good. We might say we like it, but is that really going to help you? Okay? Tell us what you want from us. And that is what's going to help you to develop as independent learners. Again, trying to get you away from being dependent learners, where you depend on other people telling you what to do. To become an independent learner is when you decide what you're looking for, and then you go and approach the people who can help you to get to that place of finding what you want. Okay? So 2 more points. The first is to remind you, of course, to please turn up to the meetings that you've arranged. So if for whatever reason, if you can't make it, please do let us know. Don't leave us hanging. We've taken time out of our schedules to meet with you, so please respect that. And if you know that you're not going to be able to make the meeting in advance, please just let us know, just send an email, and we're happy to rearrange this meeting. And that's not a problem, but you have to let us know, okay? So let us know if you can't make it. And then finally, the last point is what's a common thing that's done at the end of meetings is to agree a set of action points going forward. And you might also find it useful to take notes as well on what you've discussed in the meeting, perhaps jot down the answers to the questions that you brought to the meeting, and then that can be something you can take forward and be working on until you arrange the next meeting. Okay, so there's just a couple of basic points there for how to get the most out of your meetings with us as tutors. Right, so let's change subject and talk about the literature review. So once you've chosen your research topic, one of the 10 areas, and then decided on a specific focus within one of those 10 areas, you'll need to demonstrate the rationale for your research and describe how it fits within the wider research context within your area. And to support you in doing this, you'll need to undertake a literature review, which is a review of material that's already been published, either in hard copy or electronically, that may be relevant for your research topic. But before you conduct the literature review, you have to first find the literature to review. And we're going to be talking about this process in more detail in future presentations. However, in the previous presentation, Justin advised you to use the university database first before consulting Google. And I would second this, because Google is only going to be useful if you know what you're looking for. Remember what I said earlier about knowing what you want to find out, then you stand a much better chance of finding it. And Google operates in the same way. The more precise you can be and the more specific you can be, i.e. book titles or search terms or keywords or prominent authors in the fields, then Google's probably going to give you better results. But if you don't know what it is you're looking for, then Google's going to return you a huge array of results, which you're going to have to sift through. And that's going to take some time to work out what are the most useful sources and which ones aren't that relevant. So we would definitely advise you to first consult a librarian from our university, or perhaps approach us, myself and Justin, We can put you in touch with one of our colleagues in our department who might specialize in your field as well. If they've done research in that field, they can save you all that time having to find it yourself because they've done the research. They know the key players, the key authors in the field, the key articles and papers and texts, and they can send you straight to that, saving you all that time that you'd have to find from scratch through Google. Okay, so you'll find it's a much more efficient process to reach out to experts in the field who know the field and know the key players within it. However, even with this head start, having identified the key texts, it's still important that you have a process for evaluating all the future texts and sources that you look at. And here are some helpful tips that will help you to discern whether a source is worth reading or not. So first, the major clue will be in the title. If your keywords aren't in the title, then it's probably not going to be relevant. And then next, the abstracts are a bit like a summary where they outline the key points of an article. And you tend to see these in research journals and conference proceedings. They can also be quite useful for working out what the experiments are, what the major findings are within this paper. And again, you can use that to evaluate whether it's going to be useful for your research or not. Next, citations can be a good way to work out whether this piece of work is well regarded within the particular field that you're researching. So if it's a popular piece of work, then other authors are probably going to have referred to it within their work, and vice versa. You'll see other major authors within this work. And of course, I should say that if it's a recent paper, then of course other previous research may not have referred to this piece, but again, you can work the other way around by looking at what authors are referred to within this new piece, and again to work out whereabouts this piece of work will sit within the community, within the field of your research. Next, the date of publication is also going to be a useful indicator to work out how useful this piece of work will be within your research. Obviously, if this piece of work was published 20, 30 years ago, it's not going to reflect some of the more recent changes within the field. That's not to say that everything in the paper will be out of date or obsolete. There may well still be some key principles that will stand for all time within that piece of work, but a useful thing to do there would be to look at recent work and see how much of that earlier work is still relevant today. So we recommend looking at pieces of work within the time frame of about five years or so, depending on the field, of course. Some fields change every year. In the case of artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, so you'd want to refer to the most recent work, certainly this year or the previous year, within that, because it moves rapidly. But 5 years is a good time frame to work within most fields. Okay, so compare a wide range of dates to see what's being used and what is still used today. And then once you've identified the most relevant sources, the next step is to read them through and to make notes. And hopefully, if you've made the notes correctly, if you read them knowing what you want to find out from the sources, and you've made appropriate notes, you can then use those notes to form your literature review, where you compare and contrast different authors' work. Let's move on and have a look at the next stage of research inquiry, which is data collection. And just to reiterate, I should make it clear that we're not asking you to conduct primary research at this level. That's typically something that takes place at later levels. So this is something you might do in your final year project or dissertation, or if you go on to postgraduate to study a master's or to write a PhD. So your research at this level, foundational level, is just going to be focused on secondary research, which, to remind you, is where you review sources already out there, as opposed to primary research, where you actually go and collect the data yourself, and you conduct your own experiments or interviews or questionnaires or any other type of data collection method. Okay. However, for completeness and to make you aware of the full research inquiry process, primary research and collecting data is typically the next stage after the literature review in the process. So once your literature review has identified a gap in the body of work, or perhaps you're going to be working on the recommendations for further work that the authors that you've been reading about have identified, data collection and then the subsequent analysis of that data is going to be the typical next stage in the research inquiry process. But as I said, you don't need to worry about that at this stage. This is purely for completeness, just to let you know the full research inquiry process. However, before we move on, I do want to draw your attention to the last bullet points on this slide because I think this could be relevant. And that's keeping a note of any ideas that come up from reading sources or conducting this research. I personally find that it's very easy to forget about ideas after you've had them. So I like to write them down. I've got a little research notebook where I just keep a track of all the ideas that crop up. If I think it's a good idea, I write it down on that notebook. And of course for you, that could be a physical notebook or that could be an electronic notebook. Okay, so that's a little practice you might find helpful. So earlier, I talked about procrastination and responding to issues of perhaps a lack of motivation or time management. However, it's possible that you may get off to a great start when doing your project, but you may encounter a problem along the way. And the first thing to say here is that's 100% normal. Okay, so please don't be too upset if you encounter a problem. It's very common in the research world, just due to the nature of research. And I think back to when I was doing my PhD, and nearly every researcher that I spoke to had encountered a problem of some kind at some stage. And this was also true in my case as well. So one thing we can do though is, whilst we can't avoid problems, and it certainly wouldn't be a good idea to avoid problems, we need to find a way to respond to them. And there's a number of ways you could do this. I actually teach computer programming here at the university, and I try to encourage and try to model a method of problem solving. So if you have good analytical and problem solving skills, that's certainly a way that you can do to analyze your scenario and try and work out a way around the obstacle or a way to do your research differently. However, try not to make major changes without consulting your tutor, because it's possible that they may also be able to recommend a minor change, perhaps a minor tweak, which may not require you to actually change your subject field or your topic itself. Okay, so it's always worth checking with a tutor or someone who's more experienced as a researcher, as they can certainly advise you on how to respond to your specific obstacle or problem that you're encountering when doing your research. So don't give up and certainly don't suffer in silence. Do reach out and let us know, and we can try and advise you accordingly. So once you've selected the topic area, one of the 10 areas, and once you've chosen a specific focus or research problem within that area, and once you've written the proposal and created a plan and then identified and read through your key literature, the final stage of the research inquiry process is to write up the report. And this foundation stage, we're only looking for 2,000 words, so we're hoping that's going to be fairly gentle and achievable. And the structure that we're looking for follows some very simple headings. The first one we're suggesting is going to be the introduction, and then the main body of the report, and then conclusion, and then of course your references section. Okay, so we're hoping this is going to be a fairly gentle exercise, and we're giving you plenty of time to work through it and to draft and to rework your report. And drafting is something we're going to be talking about in future presentations, because the idea is not to submit the first 2,000 words that you write, but rather to get used to drafting and reworking sections to improve the clarity and the relevance of your writing. Because unless you're an incredible writer, a very experienced writer, your best work is probably not going to be the first words that you write. Okay, so therefore you'll need to continually work and rework your sections to improve them. All right, so we're going to be saying more about this in future presentations, which talk about drafting, report writing, and improving the structure. So in summary, let's recap over what we've talked about in this presentation. So the first step is to think carefully about your topic and ensure that it's sufficiently focused, and then write a detailed research proposal to help you anticipate the issues or problems that you're going to deal with. And then you're going to want to devote time to planning and make sure you stick to your plan and adjust it if you encounter any problems or any hitches along the way. It's always good to reach out to your tutors and your supervisors and the LDU if you have any problems, and do take heed of the advice they give you. As I say, they have been through the process before, so they do know what they're talking about. Make sure you're organised and make detailed notes as well when you're reading through your literature. And then once you've conducted your literature review and you've got all the sources you need, then it's moving into the final stage of the process, which is to write up your research. And of course, make sure you allow enough time for this. Like we said, you want to keep reworking it, so that's going to take time. So make sure you allow a few weeks to do that. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Hope that's been helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please do reach out to us. Email either myself or Justin, and we'll get back to you.